luxury items. They put up with everything that their bosses do so they can buy expensive things. Like, who said, like, but there's no, it's them speaking. Do you know what I mean? And I just feel like that's extremely subjective. Like, people only want the name brand luxury items because they want to be perceived as better self. That's not true. So, like, that kind of thing. And I also pointed out a lot of times where I feel like there's too much summary and I couldn't actually, like, understand what they were saying and really analyzing. I didn't feel like they analyzed the quotes that they did try to incorporate properly. I feel like there was just a lot of summary leading up to a quote that was kind of like mediocre. So.
Okay. Good. So.
Yeah, I was the same between an MP and a C because a lot of the same reasons. I felt like there was a lot of explanation instead of analyzing, and there were a lot of times when she would go really far from the text to explain her points instead of staying with the text to explain them. There were a lot of times when she would set up the quote with the quote, basically, just say the quote and then put it in quotations and then move on. And then at the end she starts coming to a thesis where she's talking about creating a false self, but in the whole beginning you're trying to figure out where this paper is really going. So I'd probably go with an MP.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd probably give it an MP. I feel like throughout I didn't get to finish the whole paper, but most of what I read, she was basically rephrasing what the authors have been saying rather than giving her own input on the matter. And you never really see how she feels. Every time she's trying to make a point, she'd say, this author says this. And then she'd kind of like start heading towards a point that she's trying to make, then immediately say what the other author thought. And then whenever she wants to say something, like for example, on page 2, she gave an example of her like real life situation. Like, I don't think you should ever do that. She said, for example, my parents have recently bought their first house in a modern neighborhood. Like, she's giving an example of something her parents did that's exactly related to what she just said happened, like with new houses in paradise. Like, I don't know. I just feel like she didn't really get her point across effectively.
I feel like students are allowed to use examples from the outside of the world. Is this the best example? Not necessarily. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I just feel like the example she used was exactly the same as the example she just gave above that, on like the quote that she pulled from the book, that all the houses are the same and people are living similar lives. And immediately after that, she's like, yeah, my parents just bought a house and everyone around there was the same. It's not really effective. You're just repeating what you just said by putting yourself into it. I don't know. I just never felt
so there wasn't really a textual conversation.
Yeah, it was really repetitive, and I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like in between an B and a C. I did think I agree with especially the idea that there was a lot of summary and not enough analysis to balance it out. And there were like recurring like grammar issues. Like, I saw a lot of like run-on sentences that also kind of blended in with like the personal anecdotes, which I thought some of them were more valid than others. But in between, I did think she used like a couple good quotes to support, like idea-based quotes to support what she was saying. Like when she said that people want things because of how they look and how they make them feel about themselves in respect to others. Like, maybe something like that could have been articulated clearer, but she did support it with something that said they do buy fancy clothes because they want to stand out from the crowd, not because they like these things. Like, things like that I thought were pretty valid, even if like you had to do a little bit of digging to find that. And I think she did, like, I didn't finish the whole thing either, but she was building towards a thesis, even though it wasn't clear from the beginning. So I think I would give her credit for that and give it like a C.
Okay, so you're the first person who's done the promising moment thing. But, so that's good. Go ahead.
I'm going to give her an NP. I think in the paper she has a lot of issues, especially like, in the beginning, just because like I was like, did I just zone out when I read that and like not get the point? Sometimes I reread it, but it was still missing. And I feel that like her paragraphs were very like, I mean like you could kind of get an idea of what she was trying to say eventually, but her paragraphs were still unrelated to that. And I mean, I did think, like she said, I think she did have like a few good quotes, but a few ones that also needed work. But she didn't analyze them, so she just kind of gave you a quote and left you hanging to like figure out what it was supposed to mean in relation to what she's trying to say. And I think she just has kind of like an organizational issue. Like if someone kind of sat down with her and said like, like she needs to be able to put it into words better, almost. I think like she has an idea about like the false self, but then she repeats herself about 4 times, saying that like people want things because of how they look and how they make them feel about themselves in respect to others, not because of what they really are. I think like that was stated like maybe like 5 or 6 times like throughout the paper, which obviously is just a lot of repetition. And I think in her idea about competition is the reason why aesthetics matter in life, like that whole paragraph, I thought that could have gone somewhere with what she was doing, but then she kind of got like she didn't connect how like the African American Ferguson essay related to the Chinese like very well. She could have like there was something there that could have happened and made it really good, but she didn't do that. But it still happened. But I'd give it a piece of
Okay. Hi. Okay, go ahead.
I was between an NP and a C as well. I didn't really fully read the paper, so the parts that I saw, I thought that it represented kind of a C on that level. I think she had some really interesting arguments, but many of them were ungrounded in textual support or evidence. So I think if she had maybe found something that would have been an interesting point to relate the text, it would have made her argument stronger, because she didn't really make connections that were not obvious. Most of them were just pretty obvious and superficial, which is kind of what the paper was about. Yeah, and definitely, like, I think if she had defined the sense of self earlier, it would have given her somewhere to go, but it was kind of confusing. So, but because it had some focus and wasn't horrendous, maybe it was.
Okay.
Yeah, I was also torn between NP and C. There were way too many generalizations for me to like kind of take it too seriously, like especially in the first paragraph. She makes a lot of generalizations. She's really repetitive. There's no like connection between any of her ideas, and she didn't point out that Planet Finance was a movie or a film until like I noticed from like the notations, which I don't think is like. I mean, I think she should have just like pointed it out, because everything else she used was an article, and she said like in the article. Yeah, most of my comments were just about generalizations and repetition, but she had all the makings there of a good thesis. It just like never came to fruition. And there were a lot of words that she could have explained, especially on page 3. She's talking about the Chinese and the Philippine ethnic hatred, and she throws in this idea that Abik kills Aunt Leona, but like she doesn't say anything about it. She just not even like the page it's on. She just like throws that idea in without like any sort of support, and then she goes into great detail about this like the thing in Detroit from the Ferguson movie. So there's like no connections between anything.
So it's this weird line where like something's happening in a class, and this paper has context over what happened in the class. You know what I mean? Like everybody in the class, and the teacher knows that that's a documentary, and everybody's read, you know, the Chua article that, you know, talks about BP killing Aunt Leona, you know, and it's sort of like, to make it a paper, how much do you have to explain that if your paper's being written in context?
Big example of this, like, even in the beginning of her paper, she just starts talking about aesthetics. People might not know what that is, but she never really explained what that is. She just keeps saying aesthetics.